to introduce Gidget Pryor. Gidget has worked in a number of different capacities at Global Knowledge. In her current role, she focuses on solutions for companies and individuals as they pursue new and enhanced skills development as well as certification. Gidget maintains focus and interest in computers and technology for their usefulness and applicability in the marketplace and strives to help others do the same. So with all that, Gidget, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brent. Our agenda today will be looking at why you should finish, what these certifications still mean, some quick tips to be able to finish because you don't have a lot of time. We'll also look at discovering next steps, how to get started. We'll look at the new role-based certifications and also how to map the current certifications, the MCSA, MCSE, and MCSD, to the new ones. So if you do obtain one of these certifications, how would you then map that later to one of the role-based certifications? And of course, the role-based certifications are current today. If you want to move into a role-based certification, we'll look at that as well. We'll look at just some specific steps to certification. We'll also take a look at how, why role-based certification matters even if your company is on-premise. Why would you pursue something that's not a technology your company is currently utilizing? So the first question is why? Why should you finish? Why even bother? The credentials actually are still valuable. These are some of the highest paid certifications still in the market. This is your last opportunity for this type of certification. I was looking at my own transcript the other day. I've taken and passed somewhere around 100 exams, and of those, it's various vendors, but of those, probably around 35 to 40 are Microsoft. I've never actually sat down and counted. And I do hold these certifications. So I hold the MCSA, MCSE, and MCSD certifications. And it is a bit disheartening to know that they are going to eventually expire after doing all of that work. But there are a lot of benefits to getting certified. And so we're going to look at some of those. This is your last time to be able to certify. This is your last time to be able to say you hold these credentials. Also, studying causes you to learn things you probably wouldn't learn otherwise. Years ago, I was working on a project and I was having a particular problem in SQL Server, those of you that might be familiar with that technology, where I was having read issues blocking write issues. And that's a common problem in a relational database to occur. And SQL Server 2005 was released. So SQL Server 2005 came out and there was an isolation level that I was studying for the exam, and I saw this isolation level that was new, because that's a good thing to study when you are certifying what's new in that version of the product. Microsoft tends to ask about those things, probably other vendors do as well. And I saw this particular isolation level, readers don't block writers and writers don't block readers. And I thought, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need. And I was under a fair amount of pressure to get that project going. It was a consulting opportunity that I had. They really wanted it to get started, get off the ground, and I thought, I'm just going to put it in place. Now, I didn't read, it probably wasn't great in terms of due diligence. I didn't read the kind of downside of implementing that, but in my case, it didn't end up impacting me. It can create, that particular isolation level, snapshot isolation, can create some overhead in your TempDB database. And so it didn't impact me, but it was something that I learned. And the point of this is I learned it through the process of studying for the certification for that version of the product. As I mentioned, these are some of the highest paid certifications. And even if you move into a role-based certification, it's nice to have that trend to show that you've been in the technology for a while, that you do understand the on-premise offerings. And so I encourage you to go ahead and get these certifications. You have until January 31st of next year to finish these certifications. And you might think, oh, that's months away. Well, for the average person, I would say it takes a month or two to study. So let's say you're pursuing a certification for one exam. So let's say you're pursuing a certification that's 5 exams. You're going to have to do it quickly. Some tips to help you be able to finish. If you're really interested in skills-based, we do have individual classes that you can take. Microsoft does not require you to take any class. You can go take the exam yourself without a class, without an exam prep. You can just go take the certification, and if you can pass it, that will be fine. However, it is very helpful to take the individual class. There is, you know, the hands-on opportunities that you have helps it stay in your mind. You may get to the test. I've done this many times. You get to the test and you go, oh, I don't remember what that option was called, but it was on the left-hand side of the screen, and it was kind of down. It was like the third choice in the drop-down on the left-hand side. And sometimes it will come to you. So the more hands-on opportunities you can have, the better. Get in there, work with the product. I have had questions from Microsoft where they've said, give the exact steps to how you create a database. Give the exact steps to how you implement a certain feature in Windows. And you may have to say, you right click on this, you choose the certain option, display option, and then you choose something else. So more hands-on is very useful. Even if you don't take an individual class, having the experience with the product is helpful. Another thing that we have are called boot camps. We don't have these for every topic, but we do have boot camps, which are very intense study time, as well as the skills-based, hands-on. So you're in a class. Typically the boot camps run from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. We used to have a boot camp. It was one that I taught a few times. It was brutal, to say the least. It ran across 14 days, 8 in the morning to 8 at night. And let me tell you, by about day 12, it does not bring out the best in people to be sitting in class for 12 hours a day. People are exhausted by then. But it was a way, it was the MCSD for .NET, and it was a way for people to get in a room, intensely focus, block out everything else, and work through that material, work through that content, get ready for that exam, ask the instructor, what are the tricky questions that I'm going to see on the exam? What are the types of things I need to remember? Also, you can self-study. Even if you take an individual class and you take a boot camp, you still will be expected to self-study. You can do self-study only, or you can supplement. So the self-study, I would work systematically. If you have a book, or you go through, maybe you go get the MS Press book off of Amazon for one of these titles, for one of these particular exams. Those tend to be very good. I would read the reviews about them. They're not all great. So take a look at those. That's a way to self-study. Also using exam prep software. This is one of the best things that I can recommend to you. Exam prep software like self-test software, oh, sorry, it's not called self-test software anymore. That was a throwback. It's now Kaplan IT, which just became Cyber Vista. Before that, it was Transcender and Self-Test Software. Those two companies merged, became Kaplan IT. Now it's Cyber Vista. So that is legitimate test prep software. Measure Up is also legitimate test prep software. Those are both very, very good. There's other test prep software like WizLabs, which is less expensive I'm not endorsing any one of these. These are just all things that I personally have used. WizLabs is cheaper, but it doesn't have as many features as something like Kaplan IT, CyberVista, or MeasureUp. When you get the exam prep software, start the exam, end the exam without answering any questions. That will mean that you have now failed the practice exam. Of course, our goal is not to fail the practice exam. However, that gives you an opportunity to go and look at the explanations that they've given for the questions and the answers. So that gives you an opportunity to see why they've picked the answer that they have. If you just go through the exam prep software, you will start to memorize those questions. And let's say that you take the exam and you're like, oh, I know it's either B or it's D. I'm going to go with D. And you get it right. When you review your wrong answers and why you got them wrong, that one won't come up. And you were guessing. So when you get to the exam and the question is tricky like that, and you're not sure of why you chose what you did, you may get it wrong on the exam. Whereas if you use it to self-study and to get yourself acquainted with that topic and to learn more about it and the details of why it's correct, it will serve you when you get to the exam. Also, going out to Microsoft.com/learning, it'll do a redirect now. I can't remember what it redirects you to, but you can go out there and get that particular exam and the exam objectives. They will break it into categories, and they might say 20 to 25% is based on this area. You need to look at compliance and governance, and that's 20 to 25% of the exam. Then they will list specific things you need to know underneath that. I literally use that as a checklist. Do I know high availability in this area? Do I understand pricing in Azure? Do I understand permissions? Whatever those items are, make sure that you are very clear about what they do and how you use them before you go take the test. Microsoft in general puts things on the test that they do not put in the associated curriculum. So let's say that you wanted to go take a current test, which is the T-SQL exam. And on that T-SQL exam, they are asking you to do all kinds of things. I happen to know that the exam objectives say they want you to know how to create a table. If you take the course, it does not address creating a table. That's Microsoft's course that they're telling you to study, but they always expect you to do more. They want the exam and the certification to be worth something, so they expect you to take some initiative as well as relying on the content. Okay? And then go take the exam. You can take the exam as many times as you're willing to pay for it. When you take the exam, you want to be ready. If you fail the exam, and I have failed an exam, sadly, if you fail it, you can go take it again within, I think, 24 hours. I think that's the current rule. Haven't taken one lately, although I am studying for one. So when you go take the exam, if you fail it, you can go take it right away. If you fail it twice, I think there is still a 14-day waiting period. So you want to take the exam early, but you don't want to take the exam too early. Make sure that you're ready, or do your best to be ready. Okay, so what are the next steps for you? You need to decide on your goal. If you take and pass any one exam, you will become an MCP in that area. So a Microsoft certified professional in that area. So you might be a Microsoft certified professional in Windows 2016. If you take multiple exams, and it depends on the track, we're going to look at a couple. you take multiple exams, you may achieve the MCSA. For most of the tracks, that is 3 exams. So decide on what your goals are, prepare your plan. I was talking to one of the people on my team, and he said he is studying for the cloud practitioner, and he wants to go take that exam by October 1st. So he has set out a study schedule of how to get ready for that cloud practitioner by October 1st. That's an AWS exam, by the way. Prepare your plan. How are you going to study? You're going to study each Saturday for 6 hours? Are you going to study 2 hours a day, 3 nights a week? Create a very specific plan for yourself and stick to it. And then, of course, take action. One thing, it's not on my slide here, but one thing that I want to mention, and this may sound like kind of a silly study tip, but it's helped me a lot over the years. Most people learn better visually. We respond to things visually. When I study for an exam, especially if it's an area of the exam that I don't feel too confident, I will take notes, and I'll take my notes in different colors of pens. I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten to a test and I'm like, oh, what was that? And you remember that it was in green and it was just a little bit down the page, and it might help you remember. So for some of you, that might not work at all. For me, it has been very useful. All right, examples, some paths to certification. So let's say that you want to get the MCSA, MCSE, and you want the business intelligence track. You can take these exams in any order. So let's say that you started with exam 7467. So notice the course is 20467, but the exam is 70. So the 2 is replaced with the 7. You could take that first. If you feel most confident for that exam, you can take it first. That will make you an MCP in that area. So the order of these does not matter. I will tell you, if this is a track that you are interested in, I would spend the most amount of time studying for the 70-461 exam. When I took that particular exam, I had been at the time working in T-SQL regularly for 20 plus years. And I took that exam. I took the upgrade exam, which I would not recommend. I'll talk about that. I took the upgrade exam and I missed it by 9 points. So I missed it by a part of a question. It was one of the hardest exams I have ever taken. I would put it in my top 2 most difficult ever, which I was surprised that they could make it so hard. I've taken other T-SQL exams over the years, other versions of it, but this particular exam is very hard. I don't mean that to discourage you. I'm just telling you realistically, it was an exam that I expected not to be that hard, and it really was that hard. So there's a pretty high failure rate for that exam. Microsoft does not publish failure rates, but we just know from student feedback. The SQL Server Administration exam, when I went to take that, I had a voucher. I had some time, I could go take it, and I thought, you know, I have a voucher with a free retake. I'm just going to go see what's on it. And so I did. I was not expecting to pass. I hadn't studied at all, and I passed. So it just depends, you know, on your particular background, how much you've studied, how much you've worked in it. I've worked with both of those a lot, but I was surprised at the difference in them. So not all the exams are equally difficult. And one thing that you can do is, and can do wisely, is study for multiple exams at a time. So if we go back here and you study for reporting services and data models and designing business intelligence solutions, that's a good partnering to study for those at the same time. I think I took those both on the same day. So testing center had availability. I had a day that I could go do it, and I just studied for them together and took them together. So studying for one exam often helps you for another in the same track. All right, the MCSA and the MCSE for Windows Server. So we have the installation, storage, and compute with Windows Server. Networking and identity, sorry for my typo, just noticed, that should be identity with Windows Server. And then you've got the MCSA, and you can choose among these other exams. So there's several options to get your MCSE at that point. So in this particular track, there's 4 exams. Well, let's talk about the new certification paths. Role-based certifications were introduced a couple of years ago, and Microsoft, as they rolled them out, they wanted them to match what somebody does in their job responsibilities. Personally, I think the other ones also match what a person does in their day-to-day activity. You know, if you are an MCSE, you might be working in Windows Server each day, you know, an MCSE in Windows Server. But they wanted to shift the focus to say, if you're an Azure administrator, here's what you need to know. So I said understanding the new certification paths. Maybe I should have said understanding the newer certification paths, because these have been around a couple of years now, or a year and little over a year and a half. Role-based certifications are intended to apply to specific roles in the Microsoft Cloud, which is Azure. Not all of the titles include the word Azure. If we see Azure Administrator or Azure Architect, we think those are Azure certifications. But there are equivalents to what you were doing on premise with your MCSA, MCSE, MCSD tracks. There are equivalents, or at least a mapping, may not be a one-for-one match, but at least a mapping to move into the cloud. And it is useful to have both. You understand how it works on premise, and that can give you an understanding when you move to the cloud, what the differences are and how you need to manage those things differently. For example, there are some keyword elements that are available in certain programming languages that are available on premise, but not in the cloud. Or the way that you implement a firewall that's different in the cloud than it is implementing that on premise. These role-based certifications include much more than we might think just by looking at titles that say Azure. So of course, Azure roles are part of it. Then we have modern desktop, so being a desktop administrator in a cloud environment. We have developer, so you might be an Azure developer doing, creating web applications and deploying them to the cloud. Office 365, so if you were an Exchange administrator on premise and now you're moving into the cloud, there's a certification. Or if you are managing teams, there's a certification, or you have something like SQL Server. Microsoft does have different certification levels, kind of like they have with the MCP, MCSA, and MCSE. They have different certification levels here. So there's an associate and there's an expert. And now with many of the tracks, they have introduced fundamentals. So they initially had an Azure fundamentals. Now there's also a data fundamentals. There's a dynamics fundamentals. There are several there that are fundamentals. AI fundamentals, as well as the AI certifications. So let's take a look at one. We have the Azure Fundamentals AZ900 course and the exam. If you take the course, you take the exam, you are Azure Fundamentals certified. The next step might be for you to go into the Azure Administrator. You could go a lot of different directions from there, but one option is to become an administrator. The AZ104 course and exam will cause you to have the administrator, Azure Administrator. And it's really the exam that creates the certification, taking and passing the exam. You do not, as I said, you do not have to take the course, and that's still true with the role-based certifications. It's really helpful to take the course, but you do not have to. So all of the principles that we've said for the MCSA, E, and D all apply here as well. The Azure Architect is the AZ303 course and the AZ304 course. Those courses recently updated, so you may have seen them listed as the AZ300 and the AZ301. There is no such course as the AZ302. I don't know why Microsoft skipped it, but they did. So it's AZ303 and AZ304. All right, and then you will have the Azure Architect. And this is a normal progression, you know, as you want to achieve a more and more difficult level. Most architects at some point in their career have been administrators. It's not always the case, of course, but most of the time that's true. You may opt not to take the Azure Fundamentals. You may feel like you have a good grasp, although I will tell you the Azure Administrator course, the predecessor to it was AZ103, but before that it was 100 and 101. And those were a 5-day and a 4-day course. Microsoft consolidated that down. It's the same amount of content, but it's offered in a single 4-day course. So it is a lot of material. All right, so how can you map the MCSA, MCSE, and MCSD to role-based? Think about your current area of discipline, and then what is the equivalent area or the closest area in the Microsoft Cloud? So some examples. If we are currently on-premise Windows 10, we might be moving into modern desktop. If we are a Windows Server administrator, a next logical step to the cloud would be the Azure administrator or architect. If we are in SharePoint or Exchange, we might be moving into Office 365. .NET, logical progression would be the Azure developer. For SQL Server, it's really SQL Server as you get to the cloud. So you might look at the data science or data engineer. Data engineer is probably the closest to what we were doing on premise. There is a new data analytics. So if that was the type of responsibility you had, you may be in that data analytics track. You may be looking to do more with the data that you have. So you might be looking into artificial intelligence. That wasn't a certification that we had on premise. The course codes have to do with the topic. So when we see AZ, they're specifically talking about the Azure cloud itself. When I see something like DP, that's the data, or I see DA, which is data analytics, or AI, which is artificial intelligence. Microsoft has also made the exam number be the exact same as the course number. Whereas before we would have like 20461 and then the exam was 70461. So now it would just be DP 100 exam and DP 100 course. Okay, let's take a look at some steps to certification because we need a process. What is required is that you take and pass the exam. That's how you get certified, and that's all you have to do. You could go take the exam today, and if you pass, okay. Kind of a funny story, years ago, I was a desktop, I was Microsoft certified desktop support person in Windows XP, so it's been a while ago. And XP had moved, they'd moved the operating system to Vista. And I had an exam voucher that was going to expire, and I also had a free retake if I needed it. And I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be teaching Vista. I don't know if I'm going to be working in Vista. My role, my regular responsibilities were a little different than desktop support at that time. So I thought, should I take it? Should I not? I thought, I can go just see what's on it. So I talked to a friend of mine that was doing desktop support. I spent probably 30 minutes or an hour with him, talking to him about Vista, and he was kind of showing me around, and it looked pretty different to me as I recall. I was like, oh, that doesn't really look like XP at all. And then I did some test prep software for about an hour, and I just went to see what was on it. I got one of the highest scores that I've ever gotten on an exam. I was absolutely guessing. And I think it, in a way, served me well. I wasn't trying to overanalyze. I can be analytical to a fault. And so those of you that know a lot about a technology, it may not play in your favor. So I really went through that exam and just said, I don't know, that sounds like what they would call it. And it doesn't matter because I have a free retake anyway if I decide to take it again. So you want to just keep in your mind as you get ready for this process, whether you take a class, you study on your own, when you get to the exam, try to remind yourself that just because you pass an exam doesn't mean that you necessarily know so much about it, or just because you fail an exam doesn't mean that you don't know the technology. The exams are definitely geared to be very tricky. When you use the exam prep software, you should also be thinking about the way that the tricks occur in the question. There's a lot to the reading comprehension on the exam. What is recommended is that you take the class, that you look at the exam objectives, review and study, that you do self-study, that you do the exam prep software. That grouping gives you your best chance of passing. So if you're on premise, why would you care to focus on role-based? Or if you're in the cloud already, why would you care to focus in on-premise? Like if your company is already in the cloud and you're cloud only, well, you may interact with other companies that are on-premise, or you may actually take a different role and you need to know something about on-premise. So I would say both of these types of certifications are really very relevant in the market still today. If you're on-premise altogether, you may eventually migrate some or everything to the cloud. Personally, I have found the transition into Azure to be a bit challenging because I have so many years ingrained in my mind of how it works on premise. It reminds me years ago I was teaching a big group. I was multiple sessions. I was teaching them how to come from the mainframe into the Windows environment. And that transition was tough because they were used to thinking a certain way. So if you pursue both types of certifications, you will have some understanding of how it used to be, or what on-premise looks like versus how what the cloud looks like. Even if you're totally on-premise and you plan to stay that way, your company says we are never moving to the cloud, you will interact with other people that are cloud-based. You will interact with apps on your phone that are cloud-based. You will interact with banking that's cloud-based. So you are going to be dealing with technology in the cloud, even if it's not what your company is going to be doing. So role-based matters, even if you're on-premise. On-premise matters, even if you are cloud. And also it just enhances your skills and your overall understanding. It's helpful to see the transition of technology as well. All right, so let's do a little wrap up, and we do still have some time. So I might just talk to you about some test taking strategies if you all are interested, but I will take some questions first. So any questions about the things that we have covered so far?
Hey, Gidget, it's Brent. I'm not seeing anything come through in the Q&A. So if you want to start, talking about some of the test taking strategies, maybe as people have questions, they can funnel those into the Q&A.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, so let's talk about some test taking tips. Some things to expect as you go to the test. The exams usually have between 45 and 55 questions. If you take an upgrade exam, which I gave the example of, and I won't take another upgrade exam. If you take the upgrade exam, you get half the number of questions on multiple parts. So like if it's and I think there are only ever 2 exams. The one that I took, instead of getting 50 questions, I got 25 in each section. You have to take and pass both sections. So I missed one section. I got half the number of questions, so I could get a lot less, I could make a lot fewer mistakes. And then I missed it by a part of a question. So my advice is don't take an upgrade exam, even if you're currently certified, because you have less opportunity to make mistakes. When you take your test, the tests are, and Microsoft publishes their formats of their questions, so I'm not giving away any secrets that I shouldn't here. You can go out to the Microsoft website, look up the types of questions they're asking. They're drag and drop, they're multiple choice. They may ask you to interact in a lab environment, which is really, in most cases these days, that's going to be the Azure portal. That would be one of the role-based certifications. They open it up to the cloud and they say, create a virtual private network. And you have no instructions. You just have to know how to do it. Multiple choice does not just mean A, B, C, and D, although I think most of us, when we hear multiple choice, that's what we think. When I took my business intelligence exams, I had some that were choose all that apply, A through M, or choose two, A through M. So you might get choose two, choose three, choose all that apply, fill in the blank is one of the question types. A simulation, although I don't think there's any simulations currently on exams, but they always reserve the right to change it however they want. Systematically work your way through the test. Read carefully. They may say to you, questions 1 through 5, you can go back and forth through the test questions. Questions 6 through 10, they give the same wording, except that they say you cannot move back and forth. So you can't go back to a question that you skipped. Do answer everything. Okay, make sure that you do answer all the questions. If you don't answer it, you get it wrong. If you answer it incorrectly, well, at least you tried. So I'm looking I'm seeing some questions come through in the Q&A, so I want to address those. What does the renewing the role-based certifications entail? I don't think there are any upgrade exams that are planned. I have not seen any of those. So your upgrade or moving forward is to take the exam again. So let's say that you wanted to become an architect and you had taken the 300 exam and you did not take the 301 exam, you could still take the 304 exam and finish that architect. I know that's a little different scenario, but renewing them means taking the exam over again. Today, that's what it means. They may come up with something. I'm trying to get your MCSE on server 2016. My exams have been delayed due to COVID. My first of 4 exams was now set for October 15th. You have 3 more vouchers you've not used. Microsoft did extend the voucher date, but they have not extended the certification. Michael, if you want to email me, I will go back to Microsoft and get an answer to that. So it's just my name. It's Gidget.Pryor@globalknowledge.com, and I will get an answer to that. Are you trying to take the exams online, or are you trying to take the exams at a facility? At a facility. Okay, you probably are going to have to take the exams online. I don't blame you. I'm not a fan of online exams either.
Fantastic, awesome. Thank you so much, Gidget. And Michael, I put Gidget's email in the chat to you, so you can shoot her a message. So with that, unless there are any other questions, I think we're going to wrap it up. Gidget, that was fantastic as always. Thank you so much for taking the time to present today. And thank you to everyone that attended. Your comments, questions, engagement is always appreciated. If things come up and you think something comes up, you think of a question you forgot to ask, please hit us up on social media. Let's make our social media team earn their paychecks. So reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever your pleasure, and we can get questions answered for you. In the meantime, please continue to check back at globalknowledge.com. We've got so many free resources for you guys, in addition to webinars, white papers, articles, all that good stuff. So thank you so much for everyone for attending. Again, you will receive a recording of this presentation in about a week. It will be sent to the email that you used to register. So with all that, thank you again, Gidget. We all appreciate it, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
All right, thank you so much.